1969. The second Doctor Who, played by Patrick Troughton, and his companions Jamie and Zoe are about to face their biggest challenge, the War Game. Hello, welcome back to my stuff. My name is Paul Matt. This is Doctor Who Revisited. I am obliged to my viewer and subscriber, Craig Tucker, who suggested a few weeks back an interesting choice for a Doctor Who revisit in this series that I'm doing, an occasional series filling in the gap between Doctor Who episodes and seasons, looking back at some classical Doctor Who stories, not reacting to them, but just talking about them and reviewing them and chewing the fat over them. Craig suggested The War Games, Patrick Troughton's epic 10-part finale, the last serial from the black and white years of Doctor Who. And I thought, what an interesting choice, because it's not one I really would have thought of. Because, like a lot of people, my thoughts about The War Games are that it's very long, padded, turgid, and only really comes alive in its last couple of episodes. That's not true. Having watched it again, it is genuinely a Doctor Who epic. It's not the best Doctor Who story ever made, and I have seen the occasional YouTube video saying that it is. It isn't, but I'm going to say here and now, it is probably the most epic Doctor Who story of the classic era. Of course, we get epics every year in the new series, and your views on them may vary, but certainly in terms of the black and white series, The War Games was a big thing, a big 10-part behemoth at the end of a troubled season 6. I remember watching this at the time, and I was a regular Doctor Who viewer, but I was one of those who ebbed and flowed between things like Lost in Space on ITV, which seemed more expansive and bigger than Doctor Who. But I do remember watching The War Games, and although I don't think I would necessarily have been aware that Patrick Troughton was leaving, there seemed to be something different about this story. It had a different atmosphere, it had a oppressiveness, it had a sense of finality that was building towards something. And to its credit, that's what it was there to do. And I think on that basis, it does it very well. Watching it again now, I didn't watch it all in one go because it's 10 episodes. I watched it across 3 different sessions. And I was, in fact, going to split this into 2 videos. But I don't think there's any need to, because I think you can sum up what needs to be said in one video. This is actually a great, really ambitious story. Season 6 of Doctor Who, Patrick Troughton's last season, was a troubled one. Lots of stories fell apart while they were in production. Some stories didn't work. New stories had to be quickly cobbled together, which is why Patrick Troughton's third and final season isn't as memorable as the previous one. Some of the stories are quite weak. Things like the Dominators, the Crotons, the Space Pirates. They don't have much energy. They don't have much spark to them. They're very imaginative, but they seem like stories that have sort of been compromised or rushed into production. You have the odd classic. The Invasion is undoubtedly one of the great Doctor Who classics, but there is a sense of things winding down a bit and the show drifting into troubled waters. In fact, the waters were so troubled and ratings had dropped quite a lot since the peaks of the mid-60s that the show came very close to cancellation, which is why The War Games has this slightly funereal atmosphere to it. The story starts with a very impressive special title sequence with the title The War Games imprinted over this montage of warfare scenes, guns and explosions, and then the names of Terrance Dicks and Malcolm Hulke, who wrote the story, incidentally, because previous couple of other stories had collapsed. 10 episodes were needed to finish off the season, and they came up with this one huge story to round things off and to round off the era. The Doctor, Jamie and Zoe materialise, as it turns out, on the battlefields of World War I. Pretty grim place, as the Doctor remarks, one of the worst times in human history. They end up at a chateau where they are court-martialed. The Doctor is sentenced to death. Jamie is identified as a deserter from Highland Regiment, and Zoe is to be just sent off to be re-educated. The Doctor's about to be executed, but we already know that something's a bit weird here, because the commander of the camp, the general, goes into his private quarters, pulls up a painting on his wall behind which is some highly sophisticated electronic equipment. It's become evident that he's in touch with some superior intelligence. The thrust of the story then basically is that we have an alien race who have gathered together soldiers from different eras in human history, pitched them against one another in combat, attempting then to create from the survivors an ultimate army with which to conquer the galaxy. It's a highly unlikely plot, but it is typical of the imagination of the show at the time. Remember, this is the tail end of the 60s, and Doctor Who was just churning out these stories that were full of ideas, mad ideas, unlikely ideas. And this is a huge idea, and it works in the context of what this story had to do, which is bring the Second Doctor's travels to an end. And there is this sense of the spectacle about it, because watching it again, I was amazed by the size of the cast. There's so many different characters coming in and out of the stories. There's so many different settings, locations. There's a lot of location filming, which is something that was on the up in the later years of black and white Doctor Who, but not as frequent as we saw it as we moved into colour with Pertwee. So it was nice to see a lot of quite lavish outside filming. All the stuff for the First World War episodes were actually filmed on a rubbish tip in Brighton, where the comedy film Oh What a Lovely War had been filming more recently, and they just used a lot of that set. But it actually feels like a big story. Obviously money was available because this was 10 episodes, so it's got the budget of 2 separate stories. So the capacity was there for a lot of sets, a lot of characters, a lot of action. And there's a lot going on with the sets. I mean, you've got this very impressive chateau set, which is sort of this run-down building that's been occupied by the army as a base of operations. But it looks run down, the paint's peeling off the walls. It just looks like this run-down building that's falling into decay. Then you've got this barn which comes up again and again, where Civil War soldiers are battling against World War II soldiers. And you've got all these different characters from different eras mixing back and forth. Then you've got all the scenes set on the alien planet, which has got all these wild pop art sets of these black and white spinning walls and sets and characters with these bizarre glasses. There's a lot going on in this story. And one of the best things about the story actually is the fact that we've got this alien race who are trying to find a way to conquer the galaxy by recruiting from the human race. But there's a lot of tension in between them as well. We've got the war chief and the security chief, played by Edward Brayshaw and James Bree, who became something of a regular in Doctor Who in the 70s. And they obviously hate each other, and there's massive conflict between them. They're constantly undermining one another and trying to second guess one another, especially when the Doctor and his companions get involved. They sort of realise that the Doctor is an alien, and this is where we get the first hints that this involves this mysterious race we're mentioned called the Time Lords. Who are the Time Lords? We eventually meet the real villain of the piece, the Warlord, played by the brilliant Philip Maddock, who gives one of his typically sinister performances as this manipulative monster who's completely ruthless, and he's completely focused on the war games, getting this army so that he and his people can sweep across the universe. The War Chief is a Time Lord. He's a rogue rebel Time Lord. He recognises the Doctor as one of his own. And this is where, as the story progresses, little bits come out, little hints about we're finally going to find out who the Doctor is, because up until now, of course, he's just been this mysterious wanderer in space and time who travels in this machine which he seems to have acquired from somewhere. We don't know if he invented it or whether he stole it, but we just know that he's a traveller and picks people up and goes on adventures. Now we're going to find out who he is. But before we get there, it is a really good story. I mean, yeah, undoubtedly there is padding. There's a lot of back and forth, escapes and recaptures. But in the middle of all that, there are new little tidbits. There's stuff that keeps our interest up. New bits of information come up which help us get through the longueurs of the constant battles and constant back and forth. And again, I didn't find it boring because there's a lot of action, there's a lot of fights. I mean, they're slightly stagey because they were done in the BBC studios, but it has a lot of pace to it. It has a lot of energy, a lot of imagination. There's some great ideas in here. I'm not entirely sure about the Sidrats, which are being used by the aliens, because obviously that's reverse of TARDIS. I'm not entirely sure that works as an acronym, but in the first or second episode where we see one of these things arriving and it makes the same sound as the TARDIS, that's when we think, well, what's going on? How have these people got TARDISes? And that's the best thing about the story. Despite all the spectacle and the huge cast of characters and the locations and so on, the fact that there are mysteries seeded very early on, that this isn't World War One, and there are aliens who seem to have the same technology as the Doctor. Who are these people? And of course it all leads up to the spectacular and very poignant final episode where the Doctor in episode 9 has had to send a message to his own people because the situation is so huge. He can't cope with it on his own. He can't send all these people back to their own time. He has to call for help. So he puts his thoughts into a box, which is a nicely animated sequence, sends the box off into space and time, and the Time Lords arrive. The Doctor and Jamie and Zoe try to escape, but there's no escaping the Time Lords, and they're dragged back to the Time Lords' home planet, which is unnamed at this point, where the Doctor is put on trial. He, Jamie and Zoe try to escape a couple of times, but the Doctor has to face the inevitable, and he's exiled to Earth. He's forced to change his appearance, and the last we see of him, the Doctor's spinning off into the void, screaming that he's getting giddy because he's being regenerated. He won't make the decision about what he wants, what he's going to look like. The Time Lords make it for him. But before that, we've had his farewell. Jamie and Zoe are sent back to their respective places in space and time. Particularly poignant because Jamie had been with him since his second story, The Highlanders. They'd been through a lot together. But they're both sent back where they came from, and they will forget everything that they ever experienced with him. Apart from that one first adventure, there's a nice scene of Zoe back on the space station from the Wheel in Space, where she's just seen the Doctor and Jamie off at the end of that particular adventure. In truth, she goes with the Doctor, but she's now taken back to a moment after they've left, and she can't remember any of it. She looks sort of wistfully back as if there's something that she's forgotten, a bit like Catherine Tate's Donna in the more recent episodes. I really enjoyed this story. Its reputation has betrayed it, I think, over the years. People have often said, oh, it's so slow, it is so padded. And yeah, it's a 10-episode monster that was created for this specific purpose. And inevitably, we're talking about 4 or 5 hours of drama, and there are always going to be slow moments. But to its credit, as I've said, there's a lot of action, and that in itself might seem repetitive, but it keeps the energy up. And there's never a time when you think, oh, get on with it. Because, I suppose, as fans now, having been familiar with the history of Doctor Who, we know where it's all leading. And I think the atmosphere of it reminded me of Caves of Androzani and Logopolis, the last stories for the 5th and 4th Doctor, where we knew what was coming, and there's this sense of impending doom, and across the War Games that builds across every episode. So it's really a very, very good story, very underrated, one which in the past I would have said, oh god, that's dull, but possibly because I watched it in chunks rather than in 5 episodes at a time. I really appreciated it this time more than I ever have before. And of course Patrick Troughton is just superb, and you sort of think we were so lucky to have him for 3 years. The War Games is of course available on BBC iPlayer if you want to catch up with it, and it's also available of course on this DVD, which is where I watched it. I watched some of it on DVD, I watched some of it on iPlayer. Yeah, it's really good, and I'm going to give it 8 out of 10. War Games, Doctor Who, 8 out of 10. Right, I have had some more suggestions for Doctor Who stories. I will be getting to those. But if you out there, if you have just stumbled across this channel, press that button, that subscribe button. That's the first thing to do, the most important thing to do. Like the video, because that's good for analytics and so on. Leave a comment down below as well. Always welcome. Let me know what stories you'd like me to rewatch. I have, as part of this series, rewatched Brain of Morbius and Revenge of the Cybermen. They're back further along the channel. And a couple of years ago I did some other classic Doctor Who's, I think Time Meddler, but it's all open. Anything you want to suggest that you'd like me to watch, let me know in the comments down below, and across the next few months I will do my best to watch those episodes and talk about them here. Alright, thank you for watching. Hope you've enjoyed this quick rattle through the War Games. I'll see you soon. Until I do, keep taking the stuff.